Hey there, Ray again. I got another build for you. We're gonna replace an old IKEA table I've had in my living room for a really long time. I think it's made of cardboard and like veneer of some sort. It's time for it to go, and I want to build something that's a little more permanent, a little more heirloomy, a little more refined, a little more real wood in it. So I'm gonna go ahead and put some maple and marry it with some walnut, and we'll see how this one comes out. I'm excited.
All right, let's get into this. As usual, we're going to start at the miter station, and we're going to cut down this absolutely gorgeous piece of 6/4 walnut, 6/4 being 1.25 inches, not 1.5 inches. Still trying to get used to that the wood measurement situation. But anyway, we're going to cut this thing down. I had to cut the factory edge off of that first, and then we're going to cut down our skirt blanks and our leg blanks out of this. Still have that absolutely wonderful DeWalt miter saw where I can only cut about 6 inches across, flip over my wood, cut it again, but I'm not too worried about that. We're gonna be able to clean those ends up more accurately, probably on the crosscut sled or on the table saw. Thankfully I have my new fence for my miter station and stop blocks on either end, so I can just drag that piece of wood down, push it up against the stop block, and I kind of have a relatively accurate cut. Finish this off, and there's our second half of our leg blanks. So this is a pretty big glue up, so I kind of got excited with the glue. Put down about 2 times as much as I probably needed, but hey, this sucker is not going to come apart for lack of glue. Gonna spread that around. And I'm using Titebond 2 here. No reason to do anything exotic. I read somewhere that you shouldn't use Titebond 2 with, or maybe it was Titebond 3 with walnut, but it's been sticking good for me. I don't know what the issue is with the different glues in walnut in particular. I don't know if there's an oil in walnut or not, but nothing that I came across other than I used, again, probably 2 times as much glue as I really needed, so I could probably overcome any weakness of Titebond 2 and walnut just by putting extra glue on there. I ended up making quite a mess for myself. It's spilling off the back here, and I really didn't want that all over the top of my workbench. And I didn't use the sugar or sand technique. This thing slid around quite a bit as I was trying to clamp it up. I don't trust that sugar method or anything with an abrasive in there. I just feel like it's gonna separate the wood even by the whatever the diameter of a sugar grain. Just seems like more separation than I need. So I try to just get those wood fibers as close to each other as I can. And then the old I don't have enough clamp situation goes on, and I try to find every clamp I have in the shop to clamp this thing down. But I'm pretty sure I got a good clamp on it because that squeeze out is looking pretty sweet over there. Again, I kept checking for it, seeing if it was twisting or shifting, and I almost dropped this $200 piece of walnut on the floor. That would have been awesome. Still looking for more clamps around the shop. But we got good squeeze out again, so pretty happy with this glue up. I think we're gonna have a nice solid chunk of walnut here. Wait, I need more clamps. There's another one. Oh, 2 more. All right, so I have to, for the tabletop, I'm doing this trick where you take 2 pieces of the glue up the panel and you plane them together to try to get complementary angles or complementary planes on each surface. This did not work well for me at all. I kept having to go back and plane, and I kept getting this weird gap kind of in the middle of my the panels. It was almost as if there was a wave in the planer somehow, where it was kind of maybe it was picking it up, or maybe there was a piece of sawdust on the surface, and it was just kind of picking up the panel somewhere, and I was getting this weird kind of gap every single time I tried to glue these up. It was actually pretty frustrating. There's two situations. One, I have a very cheap planer, and two, I'm an idiot and I'm a novice when it comes to woodworking, so I don't know what the problem was, and I'll continue to try to dial in my planer. But I fought this little gap in these panels for quite a while. Eventually, I just decided, you know what, I have clamps, and I'm going to put these things in there, and I'm just going to clamp the crap out of them, and I think we're going to squish that little gap into oblivion. And make it up with a little bit of glue too. So put in plenty of glue to make sure I was going to fill up any gaps, and just kind of crossed my fingers and hope I was going to squeeze that thing closed. So this is my first panel glue up. I did all the things that I read online. I didn't have the parallel clamps like a lot of people use, but actually I do have a pair, but I really like these Rockler, I don't know what they're called. They're kind of like pseudo parallel clamps, bar clamps, but they really seem to hold things in parallel. They seem to do a really nice job. You can put a lot of pressure on your wood, and you can do it incrementally because you have a little a screw wheel on the end, so you're not just trying to squeeze a handle or something. You can really be kind of finesse your clamping pressure. I didn't get a very flat glue up on this panel, which is going to cause me some time with the old sander later on. But like I said, it's my first panel glue up, and all things considered, I got it glued up. I ended up with a relatively flat panel once I got things straightened out. And they kept wanting to shift back and forth, again, not wanting to use that sugar method or whatever to try to prevent that sliding. I got it figured out. So I clamped all the joints to try to keep them as parallel as I could, at least on the edges. Again, I was doing it at the same time as I was doing the glue up of the leg blanks section, so I'm starting to get into the bottom of the barrel on the old clamps here. But I got all the joints glued up. I didn't use the bourbon moth hammer method. I didn't see a need for that in this case. It just didn't look like I was that far out of flat. So my biggest concern was just closing up that gap between the panels. And pipe clamps for the win. I like the pipe clamps. Again, you can really, with that screw on the end, you can really put a lot of pressure on whatever you're trying to clamp up. So these things work really nice. They do tend to leave a residue because it's just black pipe that you're using as the clamp. So you tend to either put some tape down or just sand it off later. And I had this big old chunk of poplar left over from the bed build, and I tried to use that to kind of help keep everything flat because it did want to bow on me a bit. Wanted to bow up, and you can see that there where that poplar is kind of lifting up. So I tried to I put some packing tape on the bottom of that, and hopefully it actually didn't stick at all. Actually, the packing tape worked great, but I used this to try to flatten out that panel as best I could. Could have been used another one on the bottom. So I got the leg blanks cut down, and originally, you can see one off to the right there holding up the table top. Originally, I thought I wanted to do a 2-inch square leg and taper it down to about 1.5 inches. And when I mocked that up, I kind of set the tabletop on top of that. The tabletop's only 1 inch thick, so looking at these 2-inch thick leg blanks, they just felt too beefy. And I was really looking for something a little more, I don't know what the adjective is, petite, fine, delicate, refined. I don't know what adjective to use, but it just looked too beefy. And I wanted something a little more, again, running out of adjectives. I don't know what the right word would be, but something delicate or not so heavy looking, something lighter. So what I ended up doing was cutting these down to 1.5 inches. Well, I cut them down, and then I planed them down to get my final dimension of 1.5 inches square, and then eventually I'll taper those down to 1 inch. So a 1 inch at the bottom and a 1.5 inches at the top. I'm getting my dust collection work figured out on this thing. I didn't have a huge pile of sawdust out the front of the machine, but I did get a little bit out there. What can you say when you're using an 1 7/8" hose to try to suck these wood chips out of the back of a planer? It worked out. So I have them cut down to my final thickness now, and I just mocked up this taper jig, just a simple piece of wood with a couple pieces of plywood glued or screwed to it with some clamps. And so I start my taper about 3 inches down from the top, and then I'll taper that down to the 1 inch, as I mentioned. The jig worked great. It was repeatable. All my legs came out exactly the same. It was very safe. I felt comfortable pushing it through there. I didn't realize that once I flipped the leg to try to taper the second surface, that I had already cut off a 1/2 inch of that material, and all of a sudden my clamp wouldn't clamp the leg down. So I had to figure out I had to find something that I wanted to fill that gap with. I used the cutoff from the leg, but then it felt like that was a pretty nice piece of walnut, so I didn't want to just cut that into a little pieces as well. So I tried to find something that was a little less, I don't know, expensive. This walnut was not cheap, so I found a little piece of just extra cut-off pine over there and stuck that in there, and that worked just fine. Held the leg down and taper. The only downside with taper jigs like this is you kind of have to rebuild it for every single taper you ever want to do. Not a big deal because it's just scrap, but it's just there's a bit of a time debt that you have to pay there to build a jig every single time. So I've got the tabletop kind of rough dimensions right now. I've been sanding it a little bit, but I wanted to see how the legs kind of fit of on there, and that was really unfortunate. I dropped that leg. That dropped right on the concrete and dented the end of it. Not very happy about that. I'm going to hide that one in the back. Ray's thinking bad words right there. So I stood these up on the corners. I've got the skirts off to the side. Again, I'm just trying to get a feel for what this thing's going to look like, because I really had the design for it was in my head. I didn't go off any plans or anyone's recommendations. I just kind of went, by the seat of my pants and what looks good and what doesn't look good. So the skirts I left full width. Those are 6/4 inch and 1/4 thick, which actually worked out really nice. It was about a 1/4 inch recess between the legs and the skirts. Kind of gave it a nice bit of a shadow line or relief between the two. So it's kind of starting to come together. And here's where I discovered how hard maple really is. The amount of sanding I had to do to try to level this thing out and was significant. And initially I was trying to go with like a 150 grit, but this maple is so hard. I ended up dropping down to an 80 grit just to try to level it out and get a nice smooth surface. And I actually worked my way up to the 220, and I went through some sandpaper on that. So I'm going to attach the legs to the skirts with dowels. Again, using this the Rockler dowel jig, which actually works out really nice. I was very happy with how it worked. I'm going to run into a dilemma here on the legs, though. The skirts, the legs are going to connect to 2 skirts, so there's going to be dowels on 2 different corners, 2 adjoining corners, and I'm realizing this right now that I'm going to drill 2 dowel holes into 2 dowel holes at right angles. So ultimately it was fine. I don't know how much strength degradation there might have been by having to do that, but it just didn't dawn on me when I was putting the legs together, when I was kind of designing this in my head and kind of figuring out how I was going to engineer the legs, that I was going to have dowels going through dowels to make that joint. There's other glue in the joint once we put it together, but this was an awkward kind of discovery, and I just went, oh well, I guess that's how it's going to go, and I put those dowels right through each other. So now there's holes and holes. The first little glue up here, kind of mock this up for initially. Again, almost dropped that leg. I don't know, my grip was kind of struggling for this project. I dropped this some parts a number of times. That was very upsetting. So ultimately what I had to do was I glued 2 sets of legs together, like this is being put together here, and then I had to drill out those holes again, the holes you can see. I had to drill those out so that I could put the dowels in going in the opposite direction. Like I said, I don't think there was a significant loss in strength, but it was a kind of an awkward situation to work through. Which I guess when you're a new woodworker, that's what you get. You get awkward situations to work through, and then you have to try to solve that problem. There's one set, and here's the other set. So there was a little bit of figure in one of those legs. It was actually, it was like almost like a live edge. There was kind of a, like where bark had been on one corner of this wood. My wife saw that, and she decided that needed to be a design feature, which actually ended up coming out pretty good. So I kind of left the bark kind of as much as I could there. I had to sand it down just so that it didn't end up flaking off later. But I left the kind of the dark wood underneath the bark, and it's not a completely square piece of wood at the bottom, which it actually gives it some pretty cool character. But they're flat. I was pretty happy with that. There's no twist in that wood like I had with the previous project, so we can actually make a pretty square table out of this. So this isn't quite put together, but I kept getting really excited. I kept wanting to see the tabletop on top of the base, so I did this 3 or 4 times where I'd kind of just haphazardly attached it with, or kind of assembled it with clamps, and then set the table on top. And you can see here, I didn't get any video of it, but I put about a 60-degree taper on the bottom, or a chamfer on the bottom of the tabletop. I was pretty pleased once I put the tabletop on. It didn't rock. It actually sat right on top of that thing and was pretty flat. Surprised me, actually. I'm like looking at it now going, okay, what's the problem? Why is this thing so flat? Actually, I was pretty excited. It was looking pretty sweet at this point. So I tried a different finish on this table. I used the Maloof oil blend. I don't remember the full name of it. It's like a poly oil mix. And I tried a couple different ways of applying it. I used the white scrub pad here. It went fine. This was the first coat I was putting on, so it wasn't all that critical that this particular coat was super clean. The scrubby pad kind of raised the grain a little bit, more than I expected, so I ended up having to do a bit of sanding to kind of clean that up and knock that grain down. But the process is similar to Danish oil or other wipe-on oil poly mix finishes. You put it on, you let it sit for a little while, and then you wipe it off. It didn't give me the finish that I was expecting. I've worked with Danish oil, and there's a bit of a sheen to that finish, and this never really kind of shined up. It kept a pretty flat finish on it, and which it ended up looked beautiful. It really brought the figure out of the grain of the wood, but it didn't pop with a bit of a, I don't know what I'm looking for, maybe a little bit of, not gloss, but kind of a finished look. It just never really got to where I thought it might. So round 2 or coat 2, I ended up just using some rags and applied it with, which is actually what the instructions say. You're just supposed to apply it with a rag, let it sit, for 15 minutes, and then wipe it off. I was paranoid about this stuff because it does have some mineral oil, or there's some oil in it that is flammable if you leave it sitting around in a pile. And having watched Bourbon Moth's video on starting fires in his shop, I was actually extremely paranoid using this stuff. So every night I would after putting a coat of finish on, I'd take all my rags and put them outside on the driveway in our backyard. I'd weight them down with rocks so they didn't blow away in the wind. For some reason, I was terrified there was going to be spontaneous combustion happening all over my backyard if I put these rags anywhere but flat, outdoors. I was probably overly concerned about that, but I guess that's better than not being concerned at all and starting a fire in your shop. This did really bring out the grain in the walnut. Absolutely came alive once you put a little bit of finish on there. I was actually really happy with how it turned out on the walnut. It just didn't really work very well on the maple. So then you wipe it off. So it looks pretty shiny there, but once you wipe it down, it really just kind of goes away. You end up with a very thin layer of, I guess, oil and a little bit of urethane on there, but it really just goes pretty flat after you wipe it down. That's probably on purpose, but it just wasn't quite the finish that I was looking for. I'm not completely distraught over it, but it wasn't what I was looking for. Never mind that. I'm just cleaning. I'm just wiping off the legs. Don't worry about it. But you can see it darkened it up. It looked really nice, especially once we get the two pieces together. The maple and the walnut really popped. You got a whiny dog back here. There we go. So I was very worried about wood movement on this one, so I used figure eight brackets, I don't know what they are, figure eight attachments. Actually, when I went to the store to buy them, I asked the guy about figure eight brackets, and he just looked at me like I was insane. We eventually found them, and he went, "Oh, that's what those are." But yeah, these worked out really well. I just pre-drilled. You can see there, I pre-drilled a spot so they sat flush with the top of the skirts. And I was also kind of nervous about using a driver, a power driver, to attach these. So I just screwed them in by hand. The screws were so short, I didn't want to split the wood. They ended up stripping the hole out. And then I had to line it up on the tabletop. I spent an inordinate amount of time trying to center the frame on the tabletop. And part of my challenge was the fact that I put that chamfer on the bottom of the tabletop. So I really didn't have a square edge to try to measure from, and so it kind of threw off my measurement. So every time I'd go from one place to the other, if I wasn't holding the square exactly, square to the tabletop, I would get a different measurement. So I just kind of kept going around in circles, measuring and measuring and measuring and moving and moving and moving. But I wanted it right. I wanted it as close to center as I possibly could. So I just spent the time. Walked around in circles for a little while. But eventually we got there. And I decided to mark those holes. So I was nervous again about drilling into the maple. The maple is so hard. I was worried about either stripping or having some kind of chipping in the wood. I didn't end up having that. And I was very careful when I was drilling my holes. Again, I was also nervous that I was going to drill through the top of the tabletop. And again, I wasn't completely an idiot, and I was able to drill those holes to the right depth. I didn't strip them out. I didn't chip out any of the maple, and it came out nice. I do sign all the pieces that I work on these days. I don't have a logo or anything, so I just sign them so you know that, hey, Ray made that table. So again, I was worried about using some kind of driver on this wood. I didn't want to overdrive it and strip it out, so I just used a hand, just screwed them in by hand. I guess they would call that the old-fashioned way. Whoops. No worries about denting that maple. That stuff is like stone. Got all the screws in, and had to look at it. It came out really, really nice. I decided to add a layer of wax to this, some paste wax. And so there was a little residue of that on the tabletop after I set it down. So I'm trying to clean that up and give it a little bit of a buffing to see if I could raise the sheen. That's the word I'm looking for, sheen, not gloss. So I just trying to raise the sheen a little bit on that, and it did okay. So this is where this table is going. There used to be this IKEA tabletop here, and I really should stop bashing on IKEA. That for what it is and what you're, it serves a purpose. It has a value, but this particular piece right there, it's going to hold a beer just nicely, very nicely. My daughter will probably end up putting her Switch on there. But I was really happy with how this came out. Just really, and I walk into the living room, boy, it just sets off the room. It's absolutely gorgeous tabletop. The bird's eye maple just, I don't know, it just pops in a way that like figured maple or hard maple just doesn't. So it's just a very unique wood, very, very pretty. Can't wait to rest a beer on there. And Polly likes it too. It's probably her favorite table in the entire house.
I am so happy with how that turned out. It looks beautiful in my living room. Every time I walk by, I just smile because I know that I built that with my own two hands. It's so cool being able to fuss over all the little details, the overhang of the tabletop, the bevel on the bottom of the tabletop, the taper on the legs, the wood where you want to put grain. It's such a fun experience to be able to make all those decisions. And then when it comes out the way it comes out, everything looks like you meant it to be that way. And a lot of the stuff is kind of just worked out or is an accident. But that's the cool thing about woodworking is the end result is what it is. And nobody ever knows if that's really what you meant to make or not. This was pretty close to what I had envisioned in the beginning, but my wife had some input and some things changed along the way. The legs were too big initially, so I kind of had to thin those down. But I don't know, I just really enjoy that element of woodworking, and I'm going to keep going. So I hope you guys will stick around and follow along.